The night was colder than usual, the kind of cold that slips through thin clothes and settles deep into the bones. The street lights outside the restaurant glowed softly, reflecting off wet pavement from rain that had stopped only minutes earlier. Cars passed by without slowing, their engines humming like distant waves. Inside the restaurant, people laughed, talked, and ate warm food, unaware of the quiet struggle happening just outside their glass windows. The girl stood near the entrance, her arms wrapped around herself. Her clothes were old but clean, washed carefully whenever she could find water. Her shoes were worn thin at the soles, letting the cold bite her feet. She had learned how to stand without looking desperate, how to lower her eyes just enough so people would not feel uncomfortable. Hunger had been her closest companion for a long time now. Some days she ate once, some days not at all. She watched people through the glass. Families, couples, workers ending long days. Plates filled with food passed from the kitchen to tables again and again. The smell drifted outside every time the door opened, making her stomach tighten. She had learned not to beg loudly. Loud begging often brought anger, not help. Instead, she waited for moments, small chances. Earlier that day, she had helped carry boxes for a shop owner down the street. He had given her half a sandwich and a tired smile. It was not enough. By evening, the hunger returned stronger than before. She walked slowly, thinking about where she might find food without being chased away. That was when she noticed the piano through the restaurant window. It stood in the corner, dark and polished, under a soft light. No one was playing it. It looked almost forgotten, like a memory waiting to be touched. Her steps slowed. Her eyes stayed fixed on it. Something deep inside her shifted, a feeling she had not allowed herself to feel in a long time. Music had once been part of her life. Not the kind played for crowds, not the kind that brought applause. It was quiet music, learned in small moments, practiced on old keys, felt more than taught. She rarely thought about it now. Thinking about the past hurt. But seeing the piano made the memories rise anyway, uninvited. She stood there for a long moment, her heart beating fast. Going inside meant risk. It meant stairs. It meant rejection. But it also meant warmth. And maybe food. Her hands trembled slightly as she pushed the door open. The sound of the restaurant wrapped around her immediately. Voices, plates, soft music playing from speakers. The warmth hit her skin, almost too much after the cold. Several heads turned at once. Conversations slowed. People noticed her presence right away. A girl alone, dressed like the street, standing just inside the door. She felt the familiar weight of judgment settle on her shoulders. She kept her head down and took careful steps forward. A server noticed her and frowned, unsure what to do. Before anyone could speak, the girl looked up, her voice quiet but steady. "I'm sorry to disturb," she said. "I was wondering if I could ask something." The server hesitated, then called for the manager. The room grew uncomfortable, filled with small silences and whispers. The manager approached, his expression cautious but not cruel. He had seen many people come in asking for help. Some were honest. Some caused trouble. He did not know which she was. "What do you need?" he asked. The girl took a breath. Her eyes flicked once toward the piano, then back to the manager. "I saw the piano," she said. "If no one is using it, I can play. Just one song. In exchange for some food." A few people laughed softly, not unkindly, but not respectfully either. Others looked away, embarrassed for her. A couple at a nearby table whispered to each other, shaking their heads. The idea seemed strange, almost uncomfortable. A street girl offering music for a meal. The manager looked at the piano, then at her hands. They were small, a little rough but steady. He sighed quietly. The restaurant was busy, and the pianist scheduled for the night had not yet arrived. There was already tension about that. Letting her play might calm people, or it might cause problems. "How do you know how to play?" he asked. She did not explain. She only said, "I can." There was something in her voice that made him pause. Not confidence exactly, but certainty. The kind that does not need to prove itself. He glanced around the room. No one was complaining yet. Finally, he nodded. "One song," he said. "That's all." Her shoulders relaxed slightly. "Thank you," she said. She walked toward the piano slowly, every step heavy with eyes following her. She felt exposed, like the room was brighter than before. Some people leaned forward, curious. Others prepared themselves to be disappointed. A few pulled out their phones, ready to record something they expected to be awkward or funny. She sat on the bench and placed her hands in her lap for a moment. The piano keys were cool beneath her fingers when she touched them lightly. Her breathing slowed. The noise of the restaurant faded into the background as she closed her eyes. She did not think about impressing anyone. She did not think about the food waiting at the end. She thought about nights spent listening to distant music through open windows. About moments when sound was the only comfort she had. About how music made the world feel less heavy, even if only for a little while. Her fingers moved. The first note was soft, almost unsure. A few people shifted in their seats. Then another note followed, clearer, steadier. The melody began to form, gentle and slow. Conversations stopped one by one. Forks paused halfway to mouths. The room grew quieter, not out of politeness, but because something unexpected was happening. Her hands moved with care, not rushing. The music was simple but full, carried feeling rather than skill, truth rather than show. Each note seemed to tell a small story, one of longing and patience and quiet strength. The piano filled the restaurant, not loudly, but completely. People began to listen without meaning to. A woman at the back wiped her eyes, surprised by the tears she did not feel coming. A man who had been laughing minutes earlier sat still, his jaw tight. The server near the door leaned against the wall, forgetting her task. The girl kept playing, unaware of the effect she was having. Her world had narrowed to the keys beneath her fingers and the sound rising from them. For the first time in a long while, she felt warm without needing heat. She felt full without food. Outside, the cold night continued, unchanged. But inside the restaurant, something had already begun to shift. And though the song was not yet finished, the night was no longer just about hunger. The moment the girl's fingers touched the keys, the room changed, but not instantly. First, there was a pause. People were unsure what to expect. Some looked at each other with awkward smiles, thinking this might be a strange little moment that would soon end. The couple at the corner table whispered, "She probably doesn't know how to play. It will be over in a minute." Others shifted in their chairs, uncomfortable, waiting for some sign that the restaurant's manager would stop this. But the girl did not rush. She did not look around. She only let her hands find the notes she had known all her life. The first song was slow, almost hesitant. It was a simple tune, not complicated, not full of fancy flourishes. But there was something honest in it, something that pulled quietly at the edges of everyone's attention. The sound was soft, yet it filled every corner of the room, reaching every ear without forcing itself. People started to notice. The laughter stopped. Conversations faded. Forks paused mid-air. Plates of food were left untouched as the melody moved gently through the air. Some of the customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They were not used to this. The music was not loud or flashy, but it had a strange power. It made them feel feelings they did not expect in a place where they had come simply to eat and relax. Some felt a tug of sadness, a pull of memory they could not name. Others felt a strange warmth, like a gentle hand had brushed against their heart. The girl's eyes were closed, but her memory was alive. She remembered long nights sitting on cracked steps, listening to music coming from open windows of nearby houses. She remembered trying to play an old, broken keyboard she had found, pressing keys that sometimes worked and sometimes did not. She remembered the way the wind carried the sound through the streets, how it made the cold feel less sharp, how it made her feel less invisible. Her hands moved naturally over the piano now. She did not think of the audience. She did not think of the food waiting for her. She only thought of the music itself. Each note seemed to carry part of her story. The hunger, the fear, the loneliness, but also the small sparks of hope that had never gone out. She played slowly, letting each sound settle before moving to the next, as if telling a story without words. People began to look around the room, noticing each other. Eyes met, and there was a shared surprise in them. They had expected a strange interruption, something awkward or unskilled. Instead, they found themselves caught in the middle of something unexpectedly beautiful. A man who had been quietly scrolling on his phone set it down, watching with a soft expression. A young boy clutched his mother's hand, listening wide-eyed. Some people had tears they were trying not to show, feeling a wave of emotion they did not understand. The manager stood near the counter, his arms crossed at first, uncertain. He had seen many people in desperate situations, some genuine, some not. He had never seen anyone do this before. He had thought it might be entertaining or strange, or perhaps a small nuisance. But now, as the notes floated through the air, he felt a quiet shift inside him. There was skill here, yes, but more than that, there was honesty. There was truth. It was not about perfection. It was about connection, about feeling. The room, once full of small chatter and movement, became quiet in a way that was not forced. The girl's music did not demand attention. It did not shout. It invited it. Slowly, people leaned back in their chairs, letting the sound reach them fully. They stopped trying to analyze, to judge, to think about what this meant. They simply listened. Some people remembered their own hardships as the music played. A woman touched her wedding ring and thought of years past, of struggles and losses she had endured. A man stared at his half-eaten plate, remembering nights he had gone hungry in his youth. Others thought of dreams they had abandoned, or people they had lost. The melody reached corners of memory that words could never reach. The girl noticed the subtle changes in the room, though she did not look up. She could feel it in the way people leaned forward, in the quiet that had replaced the chatter. She had always played like this, not for praise, not for attention, but because music had been her companion in the darkest moments. Now it was working in reverse. Music was no longer just her escape. It was touching others, making them pause, making them feel. A small child in the back, whose parents had been whispering complaints earlier, now sat still, staring at the piano. His mouth was slightly open, his eyes bright with curiosity. For a moment, the girl's music became a bridge, connecting her world to his. She could see it without looking, through the quiet energy of the room. People began to understand, in ways words could not explain, that this was not just a song. This was life distilled into sound. The notes flowed smoothly, with a natural rhythm. Each movement of her fingers told a piece of a story no one had asked for but everyone needed to hear. Some in the room were moved to tears without understanding why. The girl did not stop. She did not pause. She allowed herself to be fully present in the music. Her past, full of struggles, became fuel for the melody, giving it depth and emotion that could not be learned. The manager watched closely now. His earlier hesitation was gone, replaced by a quiet admiration. He had been in charge of many events, many performances, many interruptions, but he had never witnessed a moment like this. The girl, dressed in worn clothes and carrying the weight of the streets in her eyes, was creating a space where food, luxury, and status did not matter. For a few minutes, everyone was equal in the presence of her music. Some customers took out their phones to record the moment, not because they wanted to mock or judge, but because they felt compelled to capture something rare. The restaurant's usual rhythm was gone. The clatter of dishes had faded. Even the air seemed heavier, filled with a kind of quiet magic. People felt connected not just to the girl but to each other through the experience. The girl's breathing was calm. Her body, used to long hours of walking, waiting, and surviving, was still. She let the music carry her, just as it had carried her through other nights of hunger and loneliness. She did not think about the applause she might receive, or the meal she would earn. That was not why she played. She played because music was part of her, because it had always spoken when words could not. Minutes passed, though no one noticed how many. The song ended, softly, with a note that lingered in the air like a quiet whisper. The room remained still, filled with the echoes of the sound. No one spoke immediately. The silence was heavy but not uncomfortable. It was a silence full of understanding, full of unspoken emotion. The girl opened her eyes slowly, letting them adjust to the light and the gazes that had turned toward her. People were looking at her in a way they had not before. Some smiled softly, some wiped tears from their cheeks, some simply stared, trying to process what had just happened. The manager approached, his steps careful. He did not speak immediately. He only nodded once, slowly, as if acknowledging that he had underestimated her. You played beautifully," he said finally. His voice was low, quiet, almost unsure. "I did not expect that." The girl nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was soft but carried a strength that surprised him. She did not say more. She had already received something much greater than words could describe. People around the room began to clap, some tentative at first, some more warmly as they realized the emotion they had felt was shared. The claps were not loud, not dramatic, but they were sincere. The girl gave a small bow, almost shyly, and rose from the piano bench. The music had stopped, but its effect remained. A few customers came forward, quietly asking where she had learned to play, wanting to know her story. She only smiled faintly, almost as if embarrassed. She did not explain much. Words were never as powerful as the music itself. Some offered her food, some offered small gestures of kindness. She accepted what she needed quietly, without fanfare. As she left the piano, the room slowly returned to its normal rhythm. The noise of eating and talking resumed, but something subtle had changed. People talked less, listened more, and for the rest of the night, many remembered that brief moment of quiet magic. The girl, once invisible to the world outside, had claimed her presence without demand, without boast, only through the simple truth of her music. The manager watched her leave, thoughtful. He had learned something unexpected that night. Talent could exist anywhere, even where the world least expected it. The girl had walked in hungry, alone, and yet she had left a mark on everyone in the room, one that would not fade quickly. And as the door closed softly behind her, the warmth of the restaurant no longer seemed like the only thing she had earned. She had earned respect, awe, and a quiet, unspoken connection with every person who had listened. Outside, the cold wind continued to blow, but she did not feel it as sharply. Her heart was lighter. She had faced a room full of strangers, taken a chance, and shared a part of herself she thought the world might no longer see. And for the first time that day, she felt not just hunger, but hope. The restaurant seemed different after the first song. People ate and talked again, but there was a quiet tension in the air, like something had shifted without anyone knowing exactly how. The girl stood near the door, waiting, unsure if she should leave or stay. The manager approached her again, his expression softer now, curious and cautious at the same time. "You have another song in you?" he asked. "If you want, you can play a little more." The guests, they seemed to want it. She hesitated. She had not expected this. She had only hoped for a meal, a small moment to survive. But seeing the faces around her, the ones that had softened, the ones that had stopped judging and started feeling, she realized that music could do more than fill her stomach, could reach people in ways words never could. She nodded slightly. Walking back to the piano, she felt the weight of the room's attention, heavier this time. The first song had surprised them, but this time they were expecting something. Some were curious, some skeptical, some eager. She tried to push all those thoughts aside. The music was not for them. It was for the feeling itself. And if it reached them, that was only part of its purpose. She placed her hands on the keys again. This time, the song was different. It started gently, but the notes were more confident, more deliberate. There was a rhythm to her story now, a flow that seemed to guide her fingers on their own. Memories of quiet nights, of empty streets, of moments when music had been her only comfort, fueled each note. She played not to impress, not to entertain, but to share a piece of herself. The audience noticed immediately. The couple at the corner table stopped their conversation and leaned forward. The man who had been scrolling on his phone before now had his eyes fixed on the girl's hands. The child in the back sat straighter, completely absorbed. There was a soft hush, an invisible pull that drew everyone closer without a word. The song grew slowly, building with emotion. It was not loud, it did not dominate the space, but it filled it completely. People could feel the story in the music, though no words were spoken. The girl's hands moved with care, tracing the shape of her past, the pain of hunger, the loneliness of streets, and the faint, persistent hope that had kept her moving forward. Each note seemed to carry a piece of her life, and the room responded without realizing it. Tears began to form in some eyes. They were not dramatic or obvious, but quiet, steady, undeniable. A woman near the window dabbed at her cheeks, embarrassed but unable to stop herself. A man at the bar pressed his lips together, blinking rapidly, as if trying to hold back memories that the music had unlocked. The girl played on, her focus complete. She did not see the faces, she did not notice the tears. She was lost in the melody, letting it speak for her. Some of the guests whispered softly to each other, unsure how to respond. She's really good, one said. Another nodded, unable to find words. They had expected a street girl, maybe a little awkward, maybe a small distraction. They had not expected this. They had not expected to feel the music in their bones, to be moved by someone they had overlooked, underestimated, and almost ignored. The manager watched silently from the counter. He had thought he had judged her fairly, giving her a chance for a meal, but now he realized he had been wrong. She had something no one had predicted, something that could not be measured in years of training or awards. It was honesty, it was heart, it was the truth of life itself poured through her fingers into the piano. He felt a quiet respect rising inside him, a recognition that she had given more than anyone had expected, and more than anyone had the right to expect. The girl's song began to change subtly, moving from gentle sadness to a hopeful lightness. It was as if the music itself was telling the story of survival, of continuing despite the hardships, of small sparks of joy that appear when the world is harsh. People felt it in their chests. They could feel the weight of her past, yes, but they also felt the possibility of what could come. It was a lesson in resilience without a single word being spoken. A few guests tried to smile through the tears that had begun to fall. They were moved, not only by the music but by the courage it took to play it in front of strangers. They imagined themselves in her shoes for a moment, standing exposed, vulnerable, risking rejection, and still choosing to share something beautiful. Their empathy grew quietly, as strong and unnoticed as the music itself. The child at the back could not stop staring. His small hands clutched the edge of the table as though holding onto the moment. He had never seen someone play like this, had never seen music carry so much feeling. It was not about speed or skill, not about applause or recognition. It was about connection, about a human heart reaching out to other human hearts. He felt it deeply, more than words could explain. The girl noticed subtle shifts in her audience, though she did not look directly at anyone. She felt the tension in the room ease. The harsh whispers, the small judgments, the doubt, they began to fade. She played on, letting each note reach those who needed it most. Her own body relaxed slightly, her breathing steady. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a part of her story, a bridge between her world and theirs. Time passed without anyone realizing it. Minutes stretched like hours, yet no one complained. The music demanded patience, and the room willingly gave it. The girl's song built slowly, gently, carrying each listener through a wave of emotions. Some remembered lost loved ones. Some remembered dreams abandoned too early. Some simply felt the weight of their own lives lighten for a moment, carried by the honesty of her playing. The manager quietly stepped away, giving space. He had never been moved like this before. He had seen performances, concerts, events, but none had touched him in the same way. There was a quiet power in the girl's music, a truth that could not be rehearsed or faked. He realized that he had been part of something rare, a moment that would linger in memory long after the restaurant returned to its normal rhythm. The girl's hands never faltered. She was entirely in the music now, her past, her hunger, her hope, her struggles all flowing through her fingers. She did not think about the audience, about the food, about the applause. She played because she had to, because music had always been her companion, her voice, her escape. And now, unexpectedly, it had become a gift to others. Tears now flowed more openly among the audience. A woman quietly sniffled into her napkin. A man rubbed his eyes, and a few others quietly reached for each other's hands. The connection between the girl and the people in the room grew with each note. For a moment, the restaurant was not a place for food or leisure. It was a shared space of emotion, of human understanding, of empathy without words. The girl slowed the song, letting the final notes linger in the air. They did not end abruptly. They faded gently, leaving behind a quiet resonance. The room remained still for a heartbeat longer than expected. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence was not empty. It was full, heavy with feeling, rich with emotion. People realized they had experienced something rare, something that could not be bought or scheduled. Finally, a few guests began to clap softly. Their hands were hesitant at first, unsure if they should break the spell, but the sound grew. Others joined, some with quiet smiles, some with tears still on their cheeks. The clapping was sincere, not loud or demanding, but full of gratitude. The girl allowed herself a small bow, a quiet acknowledgement of the shared moment. She had given them music, yes, but they had given her something too. A chance to be seen, to be heard, to matter. The manager approached again, his face thoughtful. "You have a gift," he said simply. I did not expect this. "Thank you." The girl nodded quietly. "Thank you," she replied. Her voice was soft, but steady. She did not explain herself further. Words were unnecessary. The music had spoken more clearly than anything she could say. Some guests approached her after the performance, quietly offering small acts of kindness. One offered a warm meal, another a small tip, and a few asked where she had learned to play. She accepted what she needed without fanfare, her dignity intact. She did not ask for more than what was offered. She had not come to be noticed or rewarded. She had come because she was hungry, and she had stayed because she had a story to tell. As she left the piano bench, the restaurant slowly returned to its usual rhythm. The chatter returned, plates clattered again, and the warmth of the food filled the air. But the room felt different now, changed in a way that was subtle but undeniable. The music had left a mark, a quiet reminder that beauty and truth could appear in unexpected places. The girl stepped back near the door, feeling the cool evening air seep through the cracks of the restaurant's entrance. She was still hungry, yes, and still cold, but she felt something else too. She felt a sense of connection, a sense of hope that had been absent for a long time. She had shared her gift with strangers, and they had responded not with mockery or dismissal, but with recognition and understanding. For the first time in a long while, she believed that the world might not be entirely harsh, that kindness could exist in unexpected forms. She had taken a risk, one that might have ended in rejection, and it had turned into a moment of beauty. She had reminded herself and reminded others that even in hardship, small acts of courage could change the way people saw the world and themselves. The manager watched her leave the piano for the second time that night. He felt a quiet admiration he had never experienced before. The girl had come in quietly, seeking only food, and had left a lasting impression that no one in the restaurant would forget. He realized that sometimes the most powerful moments were not the ones planned or expected, but the ones that arrived quietly, carried by honesty, talent, and courage. Outside, the streets were dark and cold, but the girl did not feel as alone as she had before. She had touched people without asking for permission. She had shared a piece of herself without expecting anything in return. And though the night was far from over, and though hunger would return, she had reminded herself that she could matter in a world that often ignored her. Her music had not only filled the room, it had filled something inside her too. She had regained a piece of herself she had thought lost, and in doing so, she had given others the chance to feel something real and unshakable. For that night, the piano was more than an instrument. It was a bridge, a voice, and a small spark of hope in the midst of a world that could feel very cold and unkind. The restaurant had quieted down after the second song, but the effect of the music lingered in the air. People were still sitting at their tables, plates half finished, talking in lower tones, as if afraid to break the delicate spell that had fallen over the room. Even the clatter of dishes seemed softer now. The girl stood near the piano, breathing slowly, letting the last notes settle in her mind before stepping back. She felt lighter than she had in weeks, though hunger still gnawed at her stomach. The manager approached once again. His eyes were full of curiosity now, not skepticism. "Would you like to stay a little longer? Play another song if you want." The guests, they seemed to need it. She paused, considering. She had not thought about this. She had not come to perform. She had come because she was hungry. But the thought of sharing more of her music, of letting it touch people again, felt right. She nodded slowly, almost shyly, and returned to the piano. As she sat down, she looked around the room, seeing the faces that had changed in the last hour. Some were smiling faintly, some had tears on their cheeks, some were simply still, lost in thought. She did not need to play perfectly. She only needed to let the music speak. She closed her eyes and began again. This time, the song was slower, deeper, and more emotional. It was a song of struggle, of nights spent without warmth or comfort, of the loneliness that had followed her for so long. Each note carried the weight of her past, the sharp edges of hunger, and the silent hope that had kept her moving forward. She let herself feel all of it, allowing the piano to carry the emotions she had no words for. The audience listened in silence, captivated by the depth of feeling in her music. A woman near the window pressed her hand to her chest, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. A man at the bar rubbed his forehead, taking in each note as if it were a lifeline. Even the child in the back remained completely still, eyes wide, absorbing every sound. People began to understand, without words, the story of this girl, the life she had endured, the courage it had taken to stand here and share herself. The girl's fingers moved with quiet determination. She did not rush through the notes, nor did she linger unnecessarily. She allowed each chord to breathe, to resonate. She could feel the room leaning into her music, the way the people around her were holding their breath, waiting for the next sound. She played not to impress, not to entertain, but to be honest. The truth of her life was in the melody, and she offered it freely. Some of the guests began to whisper softly to each other. "Do you see how she plays? She's amazing." Another added, "It's not just skill. It's her story." They were not speaking loudly, not because they wanted to hide, but because the room itself seemed to demand quiet. The music had created a sacred space, a moment that felt fragile and precious. The manager stood quietly behind the counter, watching the girl play. He had seen many performances, many talented musicians, but none had affected him like this. It was not just the music. It was the honesty, the courage, the vulnerability. He realized that he had judged her unfairly at first. She was not just a street girl seeking a meal. She was a human being with a voice, a heart, and a story that deserved to be heard. The song began to change, shifting from sorrow to something lighter, more hopeful. It was as if the music itself was telling the story of resilience, of surviving against all odds, of finding light even in the darkest moments. People felt it in their chests. They felt the quiet strength in her hands, the persistence in each note, and the unspoken message that even when life is hard, hope remains. Tears began to fall openly now. Some guests dabbed at their eyes, some reached for each other's hands, and some simply sat quietly, overwhelmed by the emotion in the room. The girl continued to play, unaware of the impact she was having. She had closed her eyes, lost in the music, in the story she was telling through the piano. Each note carried not just her past, but the feelings she hoped others could understand, even if they had never experienced her life. A woman quietly approached the manager and whispered, Can we help her somehow? She shouldn't have to struggle like this." The manager nodded, understanding. He had already begun to see her differently, not as a problem or an interruption, but as someone who deserved respect, kindness, and opportunity. The child in the back could no longer stay silent. He whispered to his mother, "Mom, she's really amazing. Look at her hands. She's telling a story with them." His mother nodded, squeezing his hand. She felt a lump in her throat, moved by the courage and talent of someone so young and vulnerable. The music had reached them in a way that words never could. The girl's song began to slow again, each note lingering, each chord hanging in the air like a question. The room was completely still, every eye fixed on her. No one spoke, no one moved. The music had stopped being just sound. It had become presence, emotion, connection. People felt the weight of her life, her struggles, and her small victories. They felt it deeply, intimately, without needing to ask for explanation. When the final note faded, the silence that followed was heavy, not awkward. It was full of understanding, of awe, of shared human experience. People did not clap immediately. They sat, absorbing the last remnants of the song, letting the feeling settle into their bones. The girl opened her eyes slowly, looking around. She saw faces softened, tears on cheeks, hands held quietly together. She realized the music had done more than she expected. It had reached people's hearts. The manager stepped forward, his voice quiet but sincere. I don't know what to say. That was more than music. It was you." He paused, searching for words. "Thank you for sharing that with us." The girl nodded, her own voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you," she replied. She did not need to explain herself further. The music had said everything she could not put into words. Guests slowly began to speak, softly at first. "Where did she learn to play like that? She's incredible. I've never heard anything like it." They shared their amazement quietly, not wanting to disturb the delicate feeling that had filled the room. Some offered her food, others small coins or notes, gestures of kindness without ceremony. She accepted what she needed without fuss, quietly, with dignity and tact. The manager watched her for a long moment. He realized that this night had changed not only her life, but his perception of the world. He had assumed the worst, judged quickly, and been proven wrong. He had seen courage, honesty, and talent in its purest form. The girl had walked into his restaurant hungry, seeking only food, and had left a mark on every person in the room, a mark that would not fade quickly. As she stepped back from the piano, the room slowly returned to normal. The chatter began again. Plates clattered, forks scraped, but the atmosphere had changed. People were quieter, more thoughtful. They spoke differently to each other, listened more carefully, and carried the memory of her music with them. Outside, the cold night had not changed, but the girl felt warmer than she had in weeks. She had shared herself, risked judgment, and been met with recognition and respect. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, not as a street girl, not as a problem, but as someone who mattered. The music had done more than feed hearts. It had reminded her that she could matter in a world that often ignored her. She stepped into the night, the wind brushing against her cheeks, but she did not feel the cold as sharply. Her stomach still ached with hunger, but something more important had been fed. Her spirit, her courage, her hope. She had reminded herself that even small actions, even a single song, could reach across walls of judgment, loneliness, and hardship, connecting her to the world in ways she had not thought possible. The manager watched from the doorway as she disappeared into the darkness. He understood something he had not before. People carry gifts within them that the world may overlook. He had witnessed one of those gifts tonight, and though the girl had left for the evening, her music would linger in the hearts of everyone who had heard it. A quiet reminder that beauty and truth often appear where they are least expected, in the most unlikely of places, from the most unexpected people. The girl stepped out of the restaurant into the cool night air, her stomach still empty, her body tired from the long day, but her heart felt lighter than it had in months. The street looked darker, colder, lonelier than before, yet she carried with her something stronger than fear or hunger. She had shared a part of herself that no one could take away, and for the first time in a long while, she felt seen. She walked slowly, feeling the faint warmth of the restaurant still clinging to her, remembering the faces of the people she had touched with her music. The night was quiet except for the distant sounds of cars passing by and the occasional bark of a dog. She hugged her thin coat tighter around herself, her mind replaying the moments inside the restaurant. She thought about how the first song had surprised them, how the second had made them feel something they had not expected, and how now, even hours later, the memory of those moments seemed to glow softly in her chest. Music had been her companion in lonely nights, and tonight, it had become a bridge to the world. She wandered down the street, unsure where she would sleep tonight. Usually, she had a few hiding spots, corners and alleyways that offered some protection from the cold. She did not complain. She had learned to survive in ways most people could not imagine. But tonight, her thoughts were different. Tonight, she carried hope with her. The music had not only given her a meal and a few moments of warmth inside the restaurant. It had given her a reminder that life could offer kindness, even in unexpected forms. Back in the restaurant, the manager cleaned up after the busy evening. He moved slowly, thoughtful, replaying the moments of the night in his mind. He had seen a street girl come in timidly, uncertain, barely asking for anything, and he had watched her transform the atmosphere with her music. He realized that his initial judgment had been shallow, limited by assumptions and appearances. The girl had shown courage, honesty, and heart, and the memory of it lingered like a quiet light in the room. The guests had mostly left by now, but the story of the girl and her piano had not faded from their minds. Some whispered to the staff about her, asking if she would come again. A few had even offered to help her, quietly, without making a spectacle. The woman near the window had sent her daughter with a warm blanket to leave outside the door in case the girl returned. Others had offered small envelopes of money, a gesture meant not as charity but as acknowledgement of talent and courage. People had been moved in a way that could not be measured by applause or attention. The girl returned the next morning, not knowing if the manager or anyone would remember her. She was cautious, shy, and careful to avoid drawing attention to herself. Hunger had brought her back, but also curiosity. She wanted to see if the magic of the night before could continue. She entered the restaurant quietly, noticing the familiar smell of food, the soft hum of conversation, and the clean, polished piano in the corner. The manager looked up and smiled warmly. "You're here again," he said. "I'm glad. Would you like to play?" The girl nodded slightly. She walked to the piano with a sense of purpose she had not felt in a long time. She took a deep breath and placed her fingers on the keys. This time, she did not feel nervous. She felt ready. The room quieted as she began to play, and she noticed the faces of a few early customers turning toward her, listening. The melody she played was gentle, full of feeling, not about skill but about honesty. With each note, she remembered the night before, how music had connected her to people who had never known her story. She let her memories flow into the music. The hunger, the loneliness, the cold nights on the street, the small moments of kindness she had experienced over the years. The piano became her voice, speaking when words could not. People listened without interruption, some with tears in their eyes, some with soft smiles, and some simply lost in the sound of something real and human. The manager watched quietly, seeing how the girl's playing affected everyone in the room. He felt a deep admiration and a desire to help her in any way he could. He realized that she was more than a street girl. She was a human being with gifts, courage, and resilience. He approached her gently after the song ended. "You don't have to stay hungry," he said. "If you want, you can eat here. And if you'd like, you can play whenever you want. I would like to help you however I can." The girl blinked, a mixture of surprise and gratitude washing over her. No one had ever offered her this kind of chance before. Not food alone, not kindness alone, but both together. She nodded quietly, feeling warmth that had nothing to do with the restaurant's stoves or ovens. It was the warmth of being recognized, of being seen as a human being, someone worthy of respect and care. From that day, she began to visit the restaurant regularly. She played the piano for anyone who wanted to listen, sometimes for food, sometimes just to share her music. Slowly, the regular customers began to expect her presence, and new guests would pause and watch quietly, curious about the girl whose music carried a story. She no longer played because of fear or hunger alone. She played because she had something to say, because music had become her way of connecting to the world in a way that words could not. The restaurant became her small sanctuary. It was not perfect, and it could not erase the hardships of life on the streets, but it was a place where she could be herself and be appreciated for who she was. People began to offer her more than food. They brought her warm clothes, small gifts, and encouragement. The manager even helped her find a small place to stay nearby, somewhere she could rest safely after long days. Word began to spread about the girl who played piano in the restaurant. People came not just for the food, but to hear her music, to experience the honesty and emotion she poured into every note. It was not about skill or fame. It was about feeling, about connection, about witnessing someone's courage and vulnerability. People left the restaurant moved, thinking about the girl who had once stood outside in the cold, asking for a meal, and who now played music that touched hearts. She continued to play, day after day, letting each song carry her story and the stories of others. Music became a bridge not only for her but for everyone who heard it. Customers who had come expecting nothing were given something unforgettable. A glimpse into a life they could not imagine, a reminder of the strength and resilience of the human spirit. Even as time passed, she never forgot the nights of hunger, the streets she had slept on, or the moments of despair that had shaped her. She carried those memories into every note, giving them meaning and turning pain into beauty. People learned from her playing that hardship could be transformed into something that touched others, that vulnerability could be a strength, and that courage often comes quietly, without announcement or fanfare. The manager watched her grow not only in skill but in confidence. She no longer hesitated to speak to customers or to ask for small favors. She smiled more, laughed softly, and carried herself with a quiet dignity. Her music had opened doors, yes, but it had also opened her heart to the possibility of trust and kindness in a world that had often been harsh. One evening, after a particularly moving performance, a guest approached her and said quietly, "You have changed the way I see things. You remind me that we all have something to give, even when life seems impossible." The girl nodded, her eyes shining. She did not need to speak at length. The music had already spoken, and the understanding between them was complete. Her life did not transform overnight. Hunger, cold, and uncertainty still existed, but now there were moments of hope and kindness to balance the hardships. She had discovered that even in difficult circumstances, it was possible to find light, to make connections, and to be recognized for the value she brought into the world. Her music became her voice, her shield, and her bridge, allowing her to survive and to thrive in ways she had never imagined. Months later, the girl looked back on the night she first asked to play the piano for food. She remembered the cold, the fear, the doubts in the faces of people around her, and she smiled quietly, knowing that a single act of courage, asking for a chance and playing from her heart, had changed everything. It had fed her body and her soul. It had touched others in ways words never could. And it had given her a place in a world that had long overlooked her. The restaurant became more than a place to eat. It became a place of connection, of stories, of shared humanity. And at the center of it all was a girl who had once been invisible, who had found a way to be heard without shouting, who had shared her gift with honesty and courage. She had reminded everyone who listened that every person has value, that art and kindness can exist anywhere, and that the smallest acts of bravery can create the biggest changes. She continued to play every day, letting her story flow through the piano. People came, they listened, they felt, and they left carrying a piece of that experience with them. Her life remained a mixture of challenges and triumphs, of struggle and hope, but now she faced the world with confidence, knowing she could survive, she could connect, and she could touch hearts simply by being herself. The girl who had once stood on the cold streets, hungry and invisible, had found her place in the world, not because someone told her she deserved it, not because she demanded it, but because she dared to play, dared to share her gift, and dared to be herself. And in doing so, She had changed not only her life but the lives of everyone who had heard her music. She looked at the piano every day, smiling softly. It had been her companion, her voice, and her bridge to the world. And she knew that as long as she had music, courage, and hope, she could face whatever came next. The world, once cold and unkind, had shown her warmth, and she had returned it, note by note, to anyone who would listen. Her story became one not just of survival, but of the quiet power of art, kindness, and human connection. She had asked for food one night, and in doing so, she had given the world something far greater. A reminder that even the smallest voices, even the most overlooked people, can make a lasting difference simply by being brave enough to share themselves. And so, night after night, she played, feeding more than stomachs, touching more than hearts, and showing the world that courage and beauty can come from the most unexpected places. The girl who had once been alone on the streets had found her way, and in doing so, had helped others find a little more hope in their lives as well. Her journey was far from over, but she had discovered something that could never be taken away: the power to turn her life into music, her pain into beauty, and her courage into connection. The restaurant, the piano, and the people who had believed in her became a part of her story, a story that would continue, note by note, day by day, as she carried it forward into the future.